Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Some time ago now, probably about 6 years ago, we identified at the TrustBridge that there was a need for a peer-to-peer community for the poor old DPO, poor old CISO, the DPO in particular, who felt particularly isolated in their organisation with the onset of GDPR. They were found looming in corners with people having said to them, "Oh, not you again." So we set up ADPP as a nice, warm, virtual hug type community where they could go and exchange their ideas, but also their frustrations with things that were going on. We had lots of lovely meetings and lots of networking, and it was great fun. And then COVID came along and we had to cancel all our meetings. It has been suggested that we start ADPP again and we start having more and more meetings, especially as there's more and more governance to now start looking at, and regulations and AI coming along. So that's why we thought we'd start again today with a virtual session, looking to hold a face-to-face session in probably September sometime. Now, ironically, back in January 2020, we held our very last session at the offices of Simmons and Simmons in London, one evening, which was great fun, when we talked about the ethics of AI. It seems therefore appropriate that my panel tonight I'm joined here by Peter, who is the AI governance lead at Simmons and Simmons, and we're going to be talking about exactly the same subject pretty much with him, David and Tim. So what I'd like to do is get you all to actually introduce yourselves before we go any further. So Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Peter Lee. I'm a partner here at Simmons and Simmons. I started my career as a marine biologist and was then a soldier for a few years before retraining as a solicitor. But about 10 years ago, I started my own AI legal engineering business, which was acquired by Simmons and Simmons about 7 years ago. So I've been working with AI for over a decade, I suppose, and I now run the AI governance team here at Simmons, which is about helping clients use AI safely and in a way that's compliant with the law, but also commercially expeditious. In my spare time, I'm also doing a research master's at the University of Cambridge into the impact of AI on the future of work and human flourishing. And I'm focusing on the UK legal sector for that piece of research.
No, that really is interesting. And I think when we have our face-to-face meetings going down the line, we'll certainly dig into all of that a little bit more, I think. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Penny. David Clarke. One time I was responsible for cybersecurity for the world's largest financial private trading network, trading $3.5 trillion a day. After that, I ran a global security operations center, and in the last few years, been focusing a lot on ISO certification, data protection, and Penny and I kind of were co-authors of one of the 4 or 5 ICO approved data protection certification schemes,
of which LOCS 23 is one of the only other ones in the country. Tim, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. My name's Tim Hyman. I've been in and around legal for 25 plus years, mostly from the IT background. And then GDPR came along back in in fact, it was 2016 when they published it. The managing partner dumped it on my desk and said, "There you go, latest project." And like many IT directors around, it was very quickly realized this is not an IT project. However, continued to be treated as one. And in 2018, having gotten as ready as we could be, I decided to start my own consultancy, went as a practitioner in my own consultancy to help others put preps together for their GDPR or data protection frameworks, if you like. Lucky enough to get a gig with the Council of Europe, because international organizations had a very interesting situation where, because of privileges and immunities, law does not apply to them. But the EU were not happy with that and came along and said, "We're going to strip you of all funding unless you pass a test that states you are at least equivalent to GDPR." And they developed an assessment program called Pillar 9. So I got involved with that. helped a number of organizations, including the Council of Europe, pass their certification. And then I thought, well, this is just what we need. From a technical background, what we love as technologists is the black and white nature of being able to assess something against a standard and then being able to say it's either compliant or it isn't. So when the ICO launched their program, I submitted a certification standard for legal services, LOCS 23. It remains as the only one out there for legal services, but law firms and chambers and whoever services them as a processor can audit themselves against this standard and be officially compliant with GDPR. Then, of course, AI raises its head. And in one of the notable jurisdictions that does not have any AI legislation, the UK, we are looking at who to assess organizations in terms of their, let's call it, compliance with AI responsible usage. And of course, the lead regulator right now is going to be the ICO, because the biggest fear is that issues come around through the misuse of personal data and AI. That may change as time goes on. But I've been working with the ICO on updating the LOCS standard. And of course, AI has come into that. So there's been lots of discussions on what good looks like from the ICO's perspective in terms of how you measure your AI components for at least data protection compliance, if not all of the other things. And so that's the sort of thing that's now being incorporated within the updated standards. So that's my background.
And we've worked together on our new framework, which is AI TrustAssure, which is based on our GDPR approved GDPR frameworks, which has been a great collaboration for the two companies. So, of course, with AI coming in and all the hype and all the excitement around this, I think perhaps maybe a month or so ago, I think I started to see a change in some of our clients' attitudes about, well, actually, there are some risks attached to this that perhaps we hadn't realised before. And a very interesting report that Thales did said that 70% of organisations are now seeing that AI actually is a pretty important data security risk. And of course, David, we've been looking at various other standards, and majority of that's based on GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things when we did a deep dive on ISO 42001, I think we could relate that most of it, 65%, 60%, was really related to data protection.
Yeah.
And so, having data protection right makes a big deal of difference with using AI.
We'll dig into that a little bit more when we talk about guns, but we've identified, running through a list here: return on investment, governance, as ever, the third-party supply chain, a little bit on pre-deployment and accountability, and then of course the sort of ongoing monitoring of all of these. Return on investment being one of them. Tim, in particular, you have a bit of a case study on this, which helps demonstrate perhaps what we mean by that. Could you just talk us through that, without giving any names away, obviously? Talk us through a little bit about that particular one.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with a number of clients, a lot of them obviously preparing for their LOCS certification, and in doing so, they're looking at all of their internal accountability framework as regards GDPR and data protection. And of course, AI is there for all of these things now. And an interesting one is basically engagement. And a lot of clients are really struggling with the engagement of AI solutions within the organization. That idea of, well, let's just buy it and see what happens. A lot have done that. They've bought the licenses, whether that's Claude, whether that's Microsoft has come along with something, whatever it is. And then that's presented a slightly different challenge. And what we found is that the currency here is trust. And we like to call it the trust circle, in that it is rather circular, in as much as if the firm really wants to be successful with AI, it must trust its employees to start using the tools and the products. But for that to happen, the employees have got to trust the tools and the products, that they're going to work for them, not work against them. And if you're in an environment, for example, like legal, where you have other challenges such as the billable hour, and you've got a product on the one hand that makes things much quicker or more efficient, but then the only way you can sell that product is by time, you've got an instant challenge that even psychologically, do you even want it to work? There's all sorts of interesting challenges going on. And then you've got the customer, of course, or the client. And how much is the customer or client going to trust you as an organization if they find out you're using AI, or if they don't find out you're using AI? How transparent must you be, should you be? So you've got this circle of trust where everyone's got to trust everyone else, or it just falls apart. And then where that starts to push into ROI is because of the approach that many firms took, which is, well, let's just make the software tools available. Originally, they were all about encouragement. Let's get everyone using it. Let's train everybody. Let's make everybody aware. Let's make the tools available and see what happens. And some wonderful ideas started to come forward, and some not so wonderful ideas. And then when because what took some time to mature were the tools that measured usage, that measured all sorts of, if you like, the efficiency around what is being used, what isn't, whether it's being used collaboratively, how it's being used. Are people creating little mini agents just for themselves, for their teams, for the firm? All of those things. Where's the IP going with all of this stuff? Is it just with you? If you move on, is it going with you? Is it being shared appropriately? All of those questions. And then when things like tokenization came along, and it was realized that actually the cost is spiraling out of control. They're getting monthly reports, because a lot of the reports are also retrospective reports, where the IT department is getting hit with these bills because of the usage that they didn't even know about, because previously it had been encouraged for everyone to start using this. So you've got an unbudgeted usage that seems to be out of control. And again, this particular firm I was working for, what we realized very quickly is there needs to be a better way to measure the ROI if we can. And this is not the easiest area to do that, because one of the beauties of AI is the possibility. And as soon as you start using words like possibility, you're guessing at what the ROI is going to be, and you're hoping. And so we had to work out ways to create a filter. And it starts with the basic, which is why. Why do you want to do whatever it is you're proposing? Yes, there's a tool that could make producing that spreadsheet 10 times quicker than it does today. That's fantastic, but why? And what is the benefit of that? Who benefits that? If the benefits are tangible, i.e. it definitely saves half an hour, great. If the benefits are tangible in, well, I don't need to send it externally, so we've saved this much of cost, great. You can start to put that together. There might be some non-tangible benefits. It just feels as though it's going to be great for the organization or what have you.
So it's measuring productivity there.
Yeah, but when you've done all of that, where's the maths? And so what we decided we had to do was, without trying to discourage people from being inventive and wanting to use all of these various tools, was find a way of getting them to think first about the potential cost, the potential return. And that return doesn't have to be financial. That return could be efficient, and then it's up to the business to work out how to make that a financial proposition. But have all of that done in a way that it's documented, signed off by some form of authority before any real effort, because the effort that then goes into it is potentially billable time effort, or could have been. So you're starting to lose money just by working on these projects. Or someone else in a different department is working on exactly the same thing, and you're just not talking to each other. There's all of these various things going on that all needed to be pulled together so that a proper assessment can be made before something is approved for further advancement, if you like, in terms of working on it. And that has helped, now that that's in place, and it's been done in a very quick way, so that it's kind of also nicely tied in with something like a DPIA, so that you use the opportunity to assess the risks, assess the potential within the organization, assess call cost of risk, add the potential cost, one of your risks, so that you can use the same methodology of assessing it, remediating against it if needed, so on and so on, before it then passes down the chain for further assessment, further work.
This we know is
that's working quite well.
Required. I mean, we've been talking to a number of managers, saying to them, saying, "Oh, the costs have gone up on this exposure to the fact that they're, the ROI is something that they need to manage." I think is a really important area that we need to be working with those MSPs through to their clients on. So I think that case study is actually, and that tool is extremely important, that I can see being rolled out, quite significantly across a number of different organizations. One of the other areas, obviously, is governance that we're concerned about. And I read an article from CNN a couple of weeks ago, which talked about the befuddled state of AI regulation in the US specifically. Well, I think it's just everywhere. It's not just in the US, it's across, well, perhaps with the exception of the EU, it's across most other jurisdictions. Peter, what do you think is going to happen in the governance area? Can you see something major happening in the next 6 to 8 months? Is that too long?
No, I think you make a very good point about the complexity of the legal landscape in this space. The EU have, issued probably the most well-known piece of law in this space in the EU AI Act, but there are other AI-focused laws springing up around the world. The US is particularly fragmented, partly because of the philosophy of the current administration and the lack of appetite for a federal approach here. But in certain states, we're seeing AI laws, like notably Colorado and others. The thing is about AI law is it doesn't sit in a silo, of course. It sits with a network of other laws and regulations as well, irrespective of whether, for example, the EU AI Act does apply to you, and bearing in mind it has this extraterritorial effect. But if you're sitting here, sitting in the UK, for example, and the EU AI Act doesn't apply to you, you still have a consolidated mix of existing laws and guidelines and various things, the so-called soft law around standards that have been mentioned on this call, that are certainly relevant. I think in terms of big things that might happen over the coming months or year in this space, I think there's a couple of things. The first is we're starting to see more litigation in this space. And that usually sharpens people's focus or organizations' focus. I think we'll also start to see the first fines under the EU AI Act, which can be quite considerable, because various national sort of member state bodies will are going to start flexing their muscles on this, I think. Where it differs from the other major sort of data protection laws that emanate from Europe that have been mentioned on this call, like the GDPR, is that when the GDPR, my view is that, philosophically they come from the same place. So from a jurisprudence perspective, these laws are generally about protecting the fundamental rights of individuals. And it's helpful to understand that when you're looking to apply them and understand the types of things that they are mainly concerned about, like prohibited uses, high-risk uses, focusing on the use cases predominantly as opposed to the AI tools themselves. But we're in a different political landscape now than we were 10, 15 years ago, when one could argue that there was more globalization. that the Brussels effect was easier to see a pathway for. Now, certainly the clients I advise, if they're international, they will be questioning the application of certain laws kind of universally. Should they go to the highest common bar? Is that too much of a lazy answer? Is it going to put them at a commercial disadvantage? So when we consider that, I think that those things are going to come down the line. The other thing that have been mentioned on this call already are the global the standards, the emerging body of standards, which are very helpful because the law tells you what you should do, and the standards help you understand how you should actually do it. Yeah. And so ISO 42001 has been mentioned already, which is very helpful because it's a useful benchmark actually for most of my client organizations, and you can get a certification from it, of course. But across the pond, there's also been some interesting action in this space. Notably, in February, the US Treasury, through the Cyber Risk Institute, issued the Financial Services AI Risk Management Framework, which runs to 230 controls. And that's that, just been doing some big gap analysis work against that. And that is, detailed and quite helpful, if nothing else, as a very extensive checklist.
I think, David, you took a look at ISO 42001 a while ago, didn't you? And felt that, as you said earlier, that quite a significant chunk of that actually was GDPR.
Effectively aligns with data protection, absolutely. Yeah, I think about 25% aligns with cyber, and the sort of remaining bit is, this is me paraphrasing, AI algorithms.
And GDPR trumps, to use that dreadful word, but trumps everything else, really, and pretty much every other rule.
And I think it's the biggest challenge many companies have, is actually realizing, yes, I'm using a AI piece of software, but actually, is that software storing the data anywhere? Can you process software without storing it somewhere? And if it is storing it, where, and how do you delete it when it's finished?
Yeah, which we found we've come up against with a number of clients, haven't we?
Yeah, come across it all the time, but I'm only using this bit. Okay, so what does it do?
Yeah,
and that's difficulty.
So looking at a third risk here, third party risk. I know, again, David, this is one of your favourite subjects at the moment. We've been doing a lot of work in supply chain due diligence. Tell us a little bit about where you see the potential risks for AI issues.
I think we're kind of, weirdly enough, although AI has been around a while, we're still in early days. I remember in 2017 when I kind of created the greatest supplier questionnaire for GDPR, even if I do say so myself, and that the main reply I got was, "What's GDPR?"
Yeah.
And obviously that kind of matured pretty quickly. And what we've seen is, when we talk to customers, even if we're not necessarily sending them a formal due diligence questionnaire, because I was always a bit worried, still am, that they might not understand the questions. Quite often you'll talk to them and you go, okay, who owns the AI, who governs the AI, etc., who will deal with the AI? And this is in software developers. They frequently, you can tell by the body language and the way they answer that they hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. Okay, that probably comes into the pre-deployment element as well, I should think. But third-party risk, is always an issue. It's always has been an issue. And we've seen so many cyber incidents start in the third party, even the fourth party supply chain now. So I think there's an even greater concern about what external AI vendors are doing. Peter, you made a very interesting comment just before about litigation and the increase in litigation. And clearly we're worried about the fact that AI can deliver unexpected or harmful outcomes to individuals. Are you able to give us any ideas of the sorts of things that you've come up against? Obviously, again, without sharing names or specifics.
Well, there's a number of cases going through the courts at the moment, or that have been decided in the US on this topic. And there are also some cases that we're starting to see in the UK as well,
Right.
and in other jurisdictions for the people on the call. In the US, covers a whole gambit of different interesting areas actually related to AI. But a couple that might be worth highlighting. One is to do with underlying bias in the models. So there's a case in the courts at the moment involving Workday, which is to do with an individual who is suing because he believes that the AI platform has discriminated against him essentially in his job applications.
Right.
We've been rejecting those based on profiling, but the exaggerated bias in the underlying large language model. So we're seeing things like that. We're also seeing cases coming to court where hallucinations are problematic, and there's been a couple of quite high-profile cases in the UK recently involving law firms where the substance of the case, or the case hasn't been brought because of AI hallucinations, but in the course of the case, the judges admonished the lawyers because of their use of AI and their made up cases, for example, or inaccurate information that the AI tool has generated. And so as a result of that, and in fact, in one of the cases recently, which was an upper tribunal case, the solicitor involved had put confidential information into an open version of GPT, and so had to report themselves to the ICO and the regulator, which is obviously very damaging professionally, but was also demonstrates a big risk when people aren't literate and aware of AI literate and aware of the issues. And
I think that's really interesting in terms of we're talking about non-compliance here and having controls in place. So how do we educate people not to do that? How do we put those controls in place? How do we even prove that some of this stuff has actually happened? And there's 4 questions in one there. But David, in terms of the regulatory non-compliance and putting controls in place, what would be your sort of advice to companies along those to try and avoid this kind of thing?
I think the thing is, it's really, really difficult now. Everything you use has got an AI component, probably not necessarily made by the same vendor that you're using. So it's actually very difficult not to use AI. And I think things that we've sort of seen, as Peter was referring to, there's different. I think there was a judge in the US who basically said even if you've got a paid for personal ChatGPT account, as well as a free one, I think it was for 5 months, they were told you can't delete the data. Even if you thought you deleted the data, the company couldn't delete the data. So it gets quite confusing because then you've got the enterprise versions, which are then used by Microsoft. Microsoft uses ChatGPT. So kind of knowing where all this fits together and where your data is going, we are really having to hope that these providers are, tell us the full story.
And of course, the key thing really is that, going on to the next point in terms of accountability, who owns that risk within an organization relating to the usage of AI? Tim, do you have a view on that? Who owns the risk? Is it all of us?
Well, that's another interesting one, because what GDPR did do was focus organizations a little bit on these terms: data controller, data processor, data sub-processor. And that, in my view, with all the clients I've been working with 10 years on, is still not really been resolved properly. There are still many contracts out there where it's not clear who controllers are, who processors are. Some are better than others at making it clear within the contract. And then, of course, if you do make it clear, you can at least follow that waterfall of responsibility, if you like, through that food chain. Now, I think AI is just going to raise exactly, if not to a much higher degree, the same challenge. Who is that? And by the way, these are data protection standards that fall under data protection law. So a lot is going to depend on whether or not AI law, if and when it comes, operating to the same model, and B, using the same model. What's already happened is, for example, the UN 2 years ago launched what they called their updated version of standard data protection requirements for UN organizations that fall outside of GDPR. And very helpfully, data processor, exactly the same term. You are not making the decisions, you are working on behalf of somebody else. But in their infinite wisdom, they decided to call the organization, the entity that we would call a data controller in GDPR, they've called it a data steward. And that genius has meant that all those organizations who already have data stewards pottering around in departments as individuals who help out, according to UN's new definition of the data steward, is the person who decides purpose and means for the processing of all this personal data. And that highlights to me the dangers that when you start to get mixed legislation, new bits of legislation coming along, and I've already seen it with the EU AI Act, they are not using exactly the same terminology within the EU AI Act as they are in GDPR. So suddenly you've got organizations having to either second guess, well, does that mean the same as that? Or have some kind of translation table that says, well, when GDPR says that, it means this in the AI Act. So I do believe that we need to stick to a uniform model of, and I like the concept of a controller, a processor, a sub-processor, and the notion that responsibilities fly like that, with that kind of weird what's a joint controller thing in the middle of it that you can at least decide to, as long as you document it clearly, divvy up the responsibilities and are transparent about it and do all those other things. There's lots of options there, but I think it's massively important that the various bits of legislation that come along at least work together and preferably use the same terminology.
Are we going to see that the responsibility for things like this under the EU Act and the UK Act, if it ever arrives, are we going to see the board of directors, the C-suite responsibility, them being accountable for this in the same way as they are with GDPR, do you think, or is that already happening?
Well, I don't think they are under GDPR as much, and certainly the DPO is not. And I think, again, there's some, when it comes to that type of responsibility, it needs to be much clearer. One of the challenges we've had with GDPR is the current regime's lack of enforcement willingness, shall we call it, and I get the reasons behind that, but it isn't helpful in terms of one of the good things about enforcement, whether that's a financial penalty or not. One of the good things about it is the clarity you get afterwards through court cases, through decision making, through penalties issued by the regulator, that you can now, what used to be slightly ambiguous in the law, you now know what good looks like, what bad looks like. So when you've got a regime that decides they're not going to use that, we're still stuck with that interpretation that goes on for a lot of what good is and what bad is. And then going back to the sorts of standards that we're all working on, here's one of the beauties of those, because when you've got a certification scheme that specifically you can apply to what you're doing, and it's been approved by the regulator, then at least you do know what good looks like. You've got something to measure against, that you can go to sleep at night knowing that you are compliant. You can use the word compliant. If you don't have a standard, when you say I'm compliant, what are you compliant with? And who said you are? So these are all of the things that come into play. And I think it's going to be much more important with AI than it was with data protection.
And I think what Peter was referring to earlier with the litigation cases, we're going to have some precedent cases, presumably, which is going to focus people's minds over the course of the next few months. So that will be interesting to follow and have an update on where those are going. David, risk assessments for ongoing risks during AI deployment and further operation, how often should we do these?
I think there's two things. Obviously, ideally, you want to do a level of risk assessment before you create it or implement it, and probably ongoing, because I think what we see is what an AI looks like 2 months ago may not be the same as what it is now.
Yeah.
So it's understanding if there are any changes that can affect it, and then risk assessing those changes. I think one of the things that we always ask is, are there any boundary controls on the AI? So we kind of know other systems that then implemented components to restrict AI, going mad on your HR data or your financial data.
Sorry. Terrible noise. Sorry about that. Yeah, then I think that makes total sense. And I think therefore what we clearly need, we all need, is a risk framework. And we've been talking about this earlier. There are a few out there. I think 42001 is probably the best one. But I think we're finding that very onerous for a number of clients. And it's really only clients who are dealing with either government departments or potentially in the financial services area that are going as far as looking at that. But we can take elements of that, presumably within our own organisations, and actually spread that out across the life cycle of any kind of AI usage, and a scoring and assurance model that will help us identify risks and presumably make decisions about whether or not we're comfortable with that level of risk. David, is that something that you would advise people to do on a regular basis? Is actually review the risk and then make a decision whether they consider it, where they see it, depending on their appetite for risk, presumably.
I think it's the part of the problem is it's easy to say, let's do another risk assessment. And one of the things that we see is AI is not just used for one thing, it's used for hundreds of things. So do you risk assess those hundreds of things, or are you lucky enough to have, one workflow, one AI? Probably not. And I think that's where the complexity comes in, because, AI is such a great tool. You can use it for so many different things. It's how do you even manage that?
So are you saying that we need to look at it for every workflow, or do you then prioritize different
I think
workflows?
What we found is it's nice when a company has got a defined workflow. And what we're seeing is many companies actually don't have a defined workflow. They just have many, many, many use cases, which then makes it much more difficult to assess. Which then goes back to, can we create boundaries for the AI and risk assess the boundaries?
And I would add to that, and I would say, don't be scared of AI and put it in this special box that is box of magic over here. In a lot of ways, it's just another technology. So if your organization's already got the mindset of, well, we're getting a new HR system, we know it's going to process data. We know it's going to process sensitive data. So let's do a DPIA. It's starting to become, luckily, second nature to understand you risk assess a new system or product or tool. Well, that's all AI is. So don't be too scared. Just treat it as that and say, we've got this amazing tool coming in. Yes, it can be used for 100 things, like David said, but let's apply those same risk methodologies we would use for anything else that we are going to bring into the organization. Starting with the real basics. What are we going to use it for? Why are we going to use it? And what type of data is it going to process? And if we start there and any of those throw up potential risks, move on. Well, let's assess those risks. You might stop there. You might say the only data that this will ever work with is either anonymized or non-sensitive in any way. Great, carry on. But don't, because it's AI, avoid it and say, we don't know how to deal with AI, so we won't. That's the worst thing you can do.
And that's a really interesting point, because we've come across that with a number of clients and a couple of other workshops we've done recently, where people have said this is all too complicated, and then they do put their head in the sand, and that's the problem. It's then uncontrolled use of AI, and I think putting those controls in place is absolutely critical. Any thoughts? Last few thoughts. I mean, it's a really interesting discussion here that could go on and on. Any last few thoughts on what you would advise people to do when in an organization when they're adopting AI or allowing the employees to adopt AI? Peter, have you got any sort of words of wisdom there to sum up?
My main observation really is don't ignore it. So one of the big challenges that organizations face is the concept of shadow AI, the unauthorized use of the technology. So right. Everyone's got this technology on their phones. Unless you do something about that, put some frameworks and policies in place, you're just burying your head in the sand about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. So bring it out into the open as much as possible. Yeah, David, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think kind of the other one maybe is having an AI incident team, because you need so much knowledge and so many skills to kind of sometimes figure out what's going on. It's being able to pull those resources together really quickly if there is a problem.
Yeah. Excellent. And Tim, final thought from you.
Yeah, just along the lines of David, for me, I would just be calling it an AI governance team. And for me, any use of AI within the organization needs to have the use of approved by the AI governance team. And that they meet periodically, but their number one, if you like, is before any work starts on anything, it goes through that team, has that initial risk assessment, and that initial risk assessment does include those basic questions of how, why, but also that risk in terms of cost. What is the cost proposal? What is the expected return on that? Because we don't waste people's time on what is just a bit airy-fairy, and all of that. And then when it's gone through that governance approval process, it joins into an extended DPIA process where risk is being continuously assessed during the life cycle of the project. It's not one and done at the beginning or at the end. It's a continuous review process. And then the biggest thing out of all of that is the internal communication that you can achieve through that. Because if you get all AI usage passed through that then is deliberately spread out to the people who need to know within the organization, which is the IT department, the risk team, the privacy team, if there is one, all of those people. Anything you can do to prevent the shadow AI usage that has been talked about. And they are the people that need to know. There's way too many projects going on where even IT say, well, we didn't know that was happening. And that is part of the problem.
I think that one of the key things that you said earlier was don't be afraid of it. Treat it as another piece of development, IT development. And I think that's probably a really good piece of advice. That it is a bit scary, but yes, if we try and control it using the frameworks that are out there, using the risk assessments that are out there, we can all start using it and perhaps not be quite so scared as we are at the moment. So I think that was a really helpful and very useful discussion. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, David. If anybody's got any questions, please do drop them across to us, and I'll go back to the panel and ask them those questions. There will be a recording of this session available as well, which I'll make sure everybody gets. And I look forward to seeing you all at our face-to-face session sometime in September, once we've decided on a date and a venue. But it'd be really good to continue these conversations then. Thanks, everyone.